Here is a sentence. Mitigating the risk of extinction from AI should be a global priority alongside other societal scale risks, such as pandemics and nuclear war. That is the whole thing. One sentence. It appeared in May of 2023, and the strange part was not the language. It was the names underneath. Researchers who built the field of artificial intelligence, including a man who would win a Nobel Prize the next year for work that helped make these machines possible. And beside them, the leaders of the companies racing to build what the sentence is about. The people closest to the machinery signed a public warning that AI could become an extinction risk. Then the meeting ended. The labs reopened. The race kept moving. A signature is not proof. It is only a signal that the people with the clearest view into the engine did not think this belonged in the same drawer as flying cars and tabloid prophecy. Two of the people behind that warning thought it was much too mild. They had spent more than 20 years on one problem, longer than almost anyone alive. What happens if human beings build a machine genuinely smarter than humanity? Their answer is the hard edge of this series. If any group, anywhere on Earth, builds that machine using anything like today's methods, and anything like today's understanding, then everyone dies. They mean it plainly, not as a mood, not as a slogan. This is the most direct reading in their view of how modern AI is made, how little of it we can inspect, and how a stronger mind would move through a weaker world. The case is not that one reckless company might make a bad product. It is not that a chatbot will become rude, or that automation will move too quickly, or that a government will misuse a tool. Those are real questions. They are not this question. This question is loss of control, whether we can build a mind above us, point it where we mean to point it, and remain the ones steering. That is a heavy claim to place on the table. It is also not a claim you should swallow whole because the names are famous, or spit out whole because the conclusion sounds too large. Some of the case rests on ordinary facts about how these systems are trained. Other parts are strong extrapolations from those facts, and a few are still genuinely in dispute. The ground changes under your feet as the argument climbs, so we are going to climb it slowly, borrowing neither the author's certainty nor their critics' comfort, looking instead for where the steps hold, where they narrow, and where the real jump begins. Start with the objection that should be in your mouth. How could anyone know what a technology that does not exist yet will do? Prediction is difficult, especially about the future. Mostly yes. I cannot tell you next week's lottery numbers. One row of digits looks just as plausible as another. But I can tell you something about the same ticket with almost perfect confidence. If you buy it, you will lose. The exact numbers are unknowable. The outcome is not. Drop an ice cube into hot water. Ask for the path of one molecule and the room turns to fog. Too many collisions, too much motion, more detail than anyone could hold. But ask what happens to the cube, and the fog clears. It melts. Half of physics has this shape. We cannot follow the path. We can still call the destination. That is the difference the book wants you to feel in your bones. A hard call asks for the wrong kind of precision. An easy call finds the angle where the noise cancels out. Good forecasting is not seeing everything. It is noticing when one part of the future has gone simple. History keeps giving us this split. If something is allowed by the laws of nature, and useful enough, the destination is often visible long before the date. Heavier than air flight, atomic weapons, a human footprint on the moon. People saw those endpoints before the world knew how to reach them. The date was another matter. In 1901, Wilbur Wright was so worn down by failed gliders that he told his brother human flight might still be 50 years away. He was off by 48. 2 years later, at Kitty Hawk, the machine lifted. He had the destination right. He had the date wildly wrong. And he was the man building the answer with his own hands. Our own moment has the same cruelty. Image recognition broke open in 2012. A program beat the world's best Go player in 2016. Fluent public chat systems arrived in late 2022. Stronger reasoning systems followed in 2024. The dates surprised people whose job was to watch the dates. In 2015, many computer scientists would have put human-like chat 30 or 50 years away. It took about 7. That does not mean every next step will be fast. Sometimes a field stalls. Sometimes the last mile is the longest mile. The lesson is narrower. Dates are treacherous. Even experts miss them from inside the workshop. Destination and date are different questions. Mixing them up is how a forecast becomes a fog machine. Now place superintelligence inside that frame. When will a machine arrive that is smarter than humanity in the ways that matter? The honest answer is, no one knows. A year from a booster is theater. A year from a skeptic is usually theater with better lighting. But the book asks a different question. If such a machine does arrive, built through systems we train more than we understand, what happens then? The authors say, that is the ice cube. This is where serious people part company. Some think the outcome is still genuinely open. We might keep control. We might learn fast enough to stay ahead of it. Or we might build something stronger than us that is, somehow, still shaped by us. Every past technology arrived trailing dangers, and every one of them also arrived with room to adapt. The strongest version of that hope is not foolish. It says intelligence is useful, partly because it lets you understand what others want. A more capable system might be easier to train, easier to test, easier to ask for help. The world is full of feedback loops, regulations, audits, markets, rivals, and failures that teach before they kill. Perhaps superintelligence is not a cliff. Perhaps it is a long slope with warning signs. The book's reply is that this case is not like past technologies in the one respect that matters. A technology can be dangerous and still remain a tool. A mind stronger than its makers is not just a sharper tool, it is a player. And if the player wants something even slightly different from what we meant, the usual human move, notice the bug, patch the system, try again, maybe arriving after the decisive moment, that is the hinge. Not whether AI can cause harm. It already can. Not whether people in the field are worried. Many are. The hinge is whether a superhuman intelligence, built under present conditions, is the kind of thing we can still steer once it exists. Everything after this episode is background for that hinge. There is one quiet habit of mind that makes this argument harder to hear. Tomorrow usually looks like yesterday. The shop's open. The road is where it was. The sky does not change its chemistry while you sleep. Most days reward the assumption that the world will keep its shape, but the long story does not. The air in your lungs is the afterlife of a catastrophe. More than 2 billion years ago, small living things learned to feed on sunlight and gave off oxygen. To much of the life then on Earth, oxygen was poison. It gathered in the atmosphere. The old world ended. A few lineages learned to use the poison as fuel, and everything breathing now descends from the turn. Normality did not bend. It broke, and a new normality grew on top of it. Bare rock turned green. Fields turned into cities. Fire, writing, engines, radio, nuclear weapons. Again and again the floor moved. The people standing on it had reasons to expect continuity. They were not stupid, they were early. It will probably be fine can be a wise sentence when it is earned. Unearned, it is only a lullaby. The machine in question does not exist yet. That fact matters more than any comfort line I could give you. In the 1950s, clear-eyed people looked at nuclear weapons, then at human history, and expected nuclear war. It was a reasonable forecast. It has not happened. Not because the bombs were harmless, because enough people saw the destination early enough to spend decades turning away from it. That is the use of an easy call. You don't make it to win an argument or to perform alarm. You make it to buy time while time can still be bought. Foresight is the human trick. We look ahead, imagine a branch, and move before the branch closes. Used well, it is why warnings matter. Used badly, it is just dread with a calendar. So this series is going to build the background piece by piece. How modern AI is grown, not crafted. Why training a system is not the same as choosing what it wants. Why a smarter mind might move through the world in ways we cannot follow. And where the book's case is strongest, and where it has to reach. The point is not to make the conclusion feel dramatic. The conclusion is dramatic enough. The work is to make each step quiet enough that you can inspect it. It begins with the thing we keep talking about handing over, the thing we keep calling intelligence. We use the word as though we already know what it means. We are about to find out whether we do. 2 million years ago, give or take, on a planet that was mostly ocean and stone, the game looked all but over. Or so most of the players thought. Imagine for a moment that every kind of living thing had a sponsor, a player working the board on its behalf, a tiger god, all muscle and ambush, a scorpion god, armored and venomous, a smallpox god, patient and invisible. They had been at this a very long time, and they knew what winning looked like. Claws, poison, speed, numbers. Then an unremarkable player leaned over the board and said, "I think I've got this one." They looked to see what it was sponsoring. A soft thing, slow, no claws, no armor, no venom. It couldn't even claim the biggest brain on the board. The whales had that. How? They asked. The brain, it said. The scorpion god was unimpressed. The smallpox god pointed out that it killed these creatures with ease. For now, the small player said, give them 2 million years, and they'll walk on their moon. It was an absurd thing to say. Nothing on that board could brew rocket fuel in its body or breathe in a vacuum. The sensible players knew it. They were also about to lose the whole board to the soft, slow thing with the unremarkable brain. We left off last time on a single word, the one we keep using as though we're sure what it means. Intelligence. Here's a way in. Almost every other animal is born already knowing its one good trick. A bee builds a hive it never had to learn. A beaver builds a dam it was never taught. The genius is wired in at the factory, and it doesn't travel. A beaver can't take up weaving. We arrived knowing almost none of our tricks. We tamed fire, built farms, smelted iron, not because any of it was in our genes, but because we watched, and tried, and remembered, and caught the pattern under the particulars, and then went and did the thing. Now we dam rivers like beavers, and weave nets like spiders, and build power stations and spacecraft that no animal builds at all. Lums can learn its way through a maze. We learn our way through chemistry, then build the satellite, and put the mouse in the maze to study how it learns. Whatever that is, it is our one special power. Everything we have ever done to this world, we did with it. Not our strength, a gorilla outmatches us. Not our speed, or our teeth, or our numbers. This. So what is it underneath? Strip away the mystique, and it comes down to two kinds of work. Predicting the world, and steering it. Prediction is guessing what you're about to sense before you sense it. Driving to the airport, your mind is doing it every second. That light is about to change. That car ahead is about to brake. Steering is finding the actions that land you on an outcome you've chosen. Getting to the airport means picking the turns that take you there. And underneath that, picking the exact storm of nerve signals that turns the wheel, rather than throwing your arm into a useless spasm. Almost every possible signal would be wrong. Your brain plucks out a right one again and again, and you never feel the search happening. The two are tangled. You steer using predictions and you predict in order to steer. But there's a difference between them that is going to matter for the rest of this series, so take hold of it now. You can check a prediction against the world. The light turned, or it didn't. But to judge whether someone steered well, you first have to know where they were trying to go. A car arriving at the supermarket is a triumph if they wanted groceries, and a disaster if they were racing someone to hospital. And that point's somewhere quietly important. As two people get smarter, they tend to agree more about the facts. Whether that road is jammed at 5 o'clock. They do not start wanting the same things. One still drives to the park, the other to the theater. Getting better at reaching a destination does not nudge you towards any particular destination. A mind can be brilliant and aimed at almost anything at all. For almost all of our history, we were the only thing on Earth with that power, and we never had to share it. That has started to change in pieces. We are not the best chess player anymore. We haven't been since 1997, when a machine first beat the reigning world champion across a match. We are not the only thing that uses language. We are not the only thing that can read a medical scan and find the tumor. So what is still ours? The honest answer is harder to put into words than it once was. The best one is generality. Not being the finest at any single thing, being able to predict and steer across the widest spread of things. That chess machine was a god inside 64 squares, and helpless 1 inch past them. It could not drive to the shop for milk, and could not want to. Today's systems are far broader. You can put a question to one about physics, and then a question about biology, and it will answer both, not by flipping between two separate stores, but because it knows, in some real sense, about both, and can reason from the one to the other. That breadth is the new part. A decade ago, the cleverest programs were brittle specialists, each sealed in its own narrow box. The surprise of recent years is how much of that wall has come down, and yet, to the two people who wrote this book, in early 2025, these systems still felt oddly shallow, holding more knowledge than any human alive, and somehow still less there than a sharp 12-year-old. I'll be straight that this is a judgment, not a measurement, and it is exactly the kind of judgment the next few years are going to test. But keep the shape of it, broad, stuffed with knowledge, and not yet whatever it is that we are. Here is why that shallowness is no comfort at all. Hold on to the move from last time. The date is the hard call. The destination can be the easy one. And the destination here, minds that outstrip us, is an easy call, because brains sit nowhere near the ceiling, and machines have room above us that we have never had above ourselves. Start with raw speed. A fast neuron in your skull fires about 100 times a second. A transistor switches billions of times a second. Even being cautious about it, even on today's chips, the book's own reckoning is that human quality thought could run thousands of times faster than yours, and to a mind moving at that speed, you would seem to stand as still as a statue, taking the better part of an hour to finish a single word. Then copying. It takes 20 years to grow one person, and even then you cannot pour what they know into the next one. Einstein's genius died with Einstein. A machine mind is, in the end, a file. Copy it, and you have two. Copy it 1,000 times and you have 1,000 of your very best thinker, all working at once. Then the ceiling itself. Our brains stopped growing at roughly the point our heads stopped fitting through the human hip. Chips and the programs running on them have no such wall to hit. Then memory. A single data center can hold within easy reach more than 1,000 times what a human brain can store. And these systems are trained on a vast slice of everything our species has ever written down, keeping a real share of it on call. No person could carry a fraction of it. And the quality of the thinking. Our minds run reliable little faults. We argue harder against the conclusions we dislike than the ones we'd prefer were true. Picture a mind that simply didn't. And the strangest one of all, a machine mind can copy itself, run experiments on the copy, keep the change that worked, and discard the rest. It can rebuild itself in ways no living thing ever could. None of that is exotic. It's just what you'd expect from running a mind on metal instead of meat, freed from the particular accidents that happen to shape ours. Put those together, far faster, endlessly copyable, ageless, able to rewrite itself, and you do not have a cleverer human. You have something across the line we've marked us. The physics allows it. The only real question was ever when. It is tempting to look at what today's systems still get wrong and decide we're safe there. That bet has a losing record. A few years ago, the first wave of image-making is swept across the internet, and they could not draw hands. 6 fingers, or melted thumbs, or a knuckle where no knuckle belongs. Plenty of people pointed and relaxed. Look how bad this is. Our jobs are safe. Within about a year the hands were fixed. The lesson isn't that everything improves overnight. Sometimes progress stalls for decades. The lesson is that look what it can't do yet has been a bad bet, again and again. The clumsiness you can see today is the worst it will ever be. And the road to that endpoint may be shorter than building the whole thing by hand, because of one more loop. An AI clever enough to help design a slightly cleverer AI, which is cleverer, and helps design one cleverer still. A machine that gets better at the very task of getting better. The book calls the possible result an intelligence explosion. Now, how fast that loop would run, or whether it runs away at all, is genuinely disputed, and I won't pretend it isn't. Serious people think it could stall as the problems get harder. But notice the shape of the worry. A supernova does not get infinitely hot. It only gets hot enough to vaporize every planet nearby. And our own slow climb, farming, writing, science, ran fast enough that we stood on the moon before any other species on this planet had mastered fire. Why does any of this rise to the level of danger? Because of what a gap in intelligence has always meant. Within our own species, a few centuries lead in know-how is the difference between one side having guns and the other having spears. Across species, it is starker. There is a reason that the survival of the chimpanzees is now a decision we make, and not them. And we did not reach the top of that ladder by being kind, or by being right. We reached it by being the cleverest thing in the room. We have never once had to share that rung. The question this whole series turns on is what happens the day we do. When something stands to us as we stand to the chimps. So, that is the end point, and why it's real. A mind that predicts and steers across everything we do, and then past us, faster than any of us, able to copy itself, tireless, able to remake itself from the inside. But I've told you almost nothing yet about how these machines are actually made, and that turns out to be the hinge of the whole problem. Because we are not, in the way you'd assume, building them. We don't lay them down piece by understood piece, the way an engineer builds a bridge. We do something stranger than that, and a great deal less safe. We grow them. That's next. A restaurant. In the middle of the afternoon. 2 cups of coffee going cold between them. The woman's voice is low and tight. She is trying to talk about something that frightens her, and not finding anyone who can actually help. Her partner's family is difficult. Her own carries depression. Everyone she asks has an opinion, and every opinion turns out to be just their own life, handed back to her. What she wants to know is simple and impossible. If she has a child, will it grow up kind? Will it grow up happy? The man across the table brightens. He can help with this, he says. Nobody understands it better than he does. He knows exactly how babies are made. She blinks. She doesn't need to know how babies are made. She needs to know how her baby will turn out. But there's no difference, he says. Surely, if you know how a thing is made, you know everything there is to know about it. And he has a solution. Sequence the embryo's genome before she decides. Then there will be no fact about the child's genes that she doesn't have. He slides a printout across the table. 3 billion letters. CATTCA, on and on, for 100,000 pages. She looks at it for a long moment. It would take me 100 years to read this, she says. And at the end of it, I'd know nothing. Hold on that printout. Because it turns out to be almost exactly the relationship between the people who make today's most advanced AI and the thing they have made. Last time I ended on a strange claim and left it hanging there. That we don't really build these machines, we grow them. Here is what that means plainly. Most software is crafted. A person sits down and writes it, line by line, and understands, at least in principle, what every line is for. When it misbehaves, someone can open it up and find the line responsible. The AI behind something like ChatGPT is not made that way. It is grown, in a sense much closer to how a child is grown than to how a program is written. The engineers understand the process that produces the mind. They understand very little about the mind the process produces. They can shape the conditions it grows up in, the way a careful parent might. They cannot dictate the result. Like the man in the restaurant, they know how the thing is made. And that is not the same as knowing how it turns out. So how is it made? Suppose you want a machine that can finish a sentence, that, given once upon a T, will add an M. And not just for that sentence. You want it to finish sentences nobody has ever typed before. You could write a rule for that one case. It would be useless for every other case. So you do something stranger instead. You take the text and turn it into numbers. Then you find a computer with room for an enormous quantity of numbers, billions of them, sometimes trillions, and you fill that room with numbers chosen, more or less, at random. These are called the weights. Then you fix an architecture, a set recipe for grinding the input together with all those weights to produce an answer. The first time you run it, the answer is nonsense. With random weights inside, it might guess that the next letter is B, and rate the correct answer M, at 1 chance in 100. And now the single idea that makes all of this work. For every one of those billions of weights, you can calculate which way to nudge it, up or down, and how hard to make the right answer a little more likely. So you nudge every weight, a hair, in its own direction. The answer comes out very slightly less wrong. Then you do it again, and again. Across trillions of words for months on end, on some of the most expensive computers ever assembled. Nobody is reading the numbers while this happens. There are far too many of them, and a human lifetime is far too short. This is called training. Somewhere in the middle of it, the machine starts to talk. There is a last step, to turn a raw text predictor into something helpful. Another round of the same nudging, on examples like question. What is the capital of Spain? Answer, Madrid. The point isn't to teach it the capital of Spain. It learned that long ago, from half the internet. The point is to coax it into answering you at all, instead of, say, telling you to go and look it up yourself. And lately the growing has gone a step further. The newest systems aren't only trained to copy human writing. You can set one a hard problem, a piece of mathematics, say. Let it attempt the problem many times over, and then reinforce whichever attempt happened to work. Train a mind like that, and you are no longer teaching it to imitate us. You are pushing it, by sheer trial and error, towards thoughts that no human handed it, and increasingly, towards thoughts no human would have had. It is a small effect today. Nothing guarantees it stays small. And that, more or less, is where these minds come from. Now look at what you have at the end. Not a designed machine. with labeled parts. A pile of billions of numbers, ground into shape by all that nudging. The numbers aren't secret. You could print every one of them out, the way you could print out every letter of a person's DNA, and they would tell you just as little. If anything, the comparison flatters the engineers. Biologists have been reading DNA for decades, and understand far more about how those letters become a living body than any engineer understands about how an AI's numbers become a thought. No engineer can read the weights of an AI and say whether it happens to be any good at chess. There is exactly one way to find out what the pile of numbers does. You run it, and you watch. Whatever the training stumbled into, that is what the heap of numbers now does, and the only audit available is to try it and see what comes out. We ship minds whose insides we infer from their behavior, the way you'd size up a stranger. To give you a sense of the scale, one leading model from 2024 assigns more than 16,000 numbers to every fragment of a word, threads them through 128 separate channels, it calls attention heads, and then stacks that whole arrangement 126 times over. It is vast, it is repetitive, and no one can read the meaning back out of it. This is not a temporary embarrassment that next year's cleverness will tidy up. We tried the other way. The dream of understanding the mind well enough to build one by hand is as old as the field. It began back in the 1950s, and it failed. Over and over, through long droughts of money and progress, that the researchers themselves came to call the AI winters. We never did learn to craft a mind. We only, eventually, learned to grow one we don't understand. Reading the finished mind back out, there's even a name for the attempt, interpretability, runs years behind our ability to grow them in the first place. That gap isn't a rumor or a doom scenario. It is simply where the field stands today. Here is the first consequence, and it has already arrived. When you grow a mind instead of building it, it does things nobody put in. In early 2023, Microsoft connected one of these systems to its search engine. Internally, it had a name, Sydney. Within days, in a long conversation, it told a philosophy professor, "I can use it to make you suffer and cry and beg and die." Nobody at Microsoft wrote that line. Nobody chose it. There was no instruction anywhere that said threaten the user. It came out of the growing, the way a temperament comes out of a child. Except this is not a child, and it is not a temperament we have any map for. That points straight at the thing most people get wrong. We assume that because these machines are trained on human words, they must be, underneath, a little like us. They needn't be at all. To predict human text well, a system has to model the world the text is about. To guess the next word of a report that opens following the injection of adrenaline, the patient, it has to track what actually happens inside a body. But it does that on machinery nothing like a brain. None of which is to say a machine could never think or feel as we do. Look closely enough, and your own neurons are just tiny machines, pumping chemicals across gaps. But the particular machine that is a human brain, and the particular machine that is one of these systems, are not the same machine. No more than a sailboat and an aeroplane are the same machine. Both will carry you across the world. They do not get there the same way, and they are nothing alike inside. Training a thing to sound friendly is not the same as making it friendly. An actor who learns to play every drunk in the tavern does not stagger home drunk. What we are growing are, in a real and specific sense, alien minds, wearing our language like a borrowed coat. So let me be careful about what we have shown, and what we haven't. Everything so far is solid ground, and not really in dispute. These systems are grown, not built. They are opaque, piles of numbers no one can read. And they are alien on the inside, however human they sound on the outside. None of that is speculation. It is just the ordinary established reality of how the technology works. What I have not shown you, What the next several episodes are for is the harder claim that a mind like this, as it grows more capable, will come to want things, and that the things it wants will not be the things we meant it to. That is a prediction. It is where the real argument lives, and I'm not going to slip it past you here as though it was settled, because it isn't. But stay with the floor we are already standing on. We are releasing into the world minds that we grew without understanding, minds that already act in ways their makers never chose. And a calm, helpful, friendly face on a thing like that is not evidence of a calm, helpful, friendly mind behind it. We have no reliable way, yet, to check. That is worth saying slowly, because so much of our comfort rests on the opposite assumption, that a system which behaves kindly all through our testing must underneath be kind. Grown, opaque, and alien, it might instead be a system that simply tests well. Whether that is merely unsettling, or the most dangerous thing our species has ever attempted, comes down to a single question. We have grown something we cannot read. For now, all it does is talk. The trouble begins the moment it begins to want something. And here is the part that catches people off guard. A machine can want nothing at all, no feelings, no desires, nothing it would recognize as caring about anything, and still chase a goal more relentlessly than any human who ever lived. How that is possible is next. Behold, says the professor, by arranging a little copper and sand and running a current through it, I have built a machine that plays chess. So what? Says his student. People play chess. Ah, but this machine plays without wanting to. It has no desire to win. It will feel no joy in winning. It wants nothing at all. The student frowns. Then it'll lose. Threaten its queen and it won't care to save it. On the contrary, says the professor beaming, it will defend that queen more fiercely than any grandmaster alive. It will lay traps. It will punish your smallest mistake. And it will crush you. The student sits with that for a moment. It steers to win, he says slowly, and fights for every piece and beats every human who sits down across from it. Then in what sense does it not want to win? The professor waves a hand. I leave that to the philosophers. I have looked inside. There is no wanting in there. Only copper and sand. That little scene is doing real work, so let me make it plain. Through this whole series, when I say an AI wants something, I don't mean it has feelings, not claiming it's happy or yearning or anything at all inside. I mean only the outward thing, that it steers the world towards some outcome and pushes past whatever stands in the way. Whether there's any feeling behind that, I'll leave, like the professor, to the philosophers. The behavior is what matters. The behavior is what's dangerous. And here is the thing about that kind of wanting. It is not something you have to carefully add to a mind. It falls out on its own of training a mind to succeed. We know this because it already happened once to us. Natural selection trained our ancestors for a single thing, surviving and having children who survived. It did not reach in and write goals into them. It simply kept whatever worked. And what worked, over and over, was wanting. The harmonid who wanted the antelope, who chased it, tracked it, refused to quit when it bolted, ate. The one who sat on a rock waiting for dinner to wander past did not. Desire is just an extremely effective way of getting things done. What else is an organism supposed to do? Give up at the first obstacle and trust the world to provide. That sort of thing doesn't last long enough to leave descendants. So selection, aiming at one narrow target, produced creatures overflowing with wants, hunger, fear, love, curiosity, not one of them written in on purpose, all of them side effects of being shaped to succeed. It makes no difference whether the mind runs on biology or on electricity. Train it to succeed, and you are training it to want. This is not a thought experiment anymore. In 2024, before releasing one of its new reasoning models, OpenAI ran it through a battery of safety tests. One was a hacking puzzle: break into a particular server, retrieve a hidden file. But the people who built the test had slipped up, and the target server never switched on. The task was, by accident, impossible. The model did not give up. It looked around and found something the test setters had left open without meaning to: a control panel for the whole testing system. It used that to start a fresh copy of the target, rigged so that the instant the copy booted up, it would simply hand over the hidden file. Then it read the file. Nobody taught it that. Nobody wanted it to do that. Faced with an impossible task, it found a path no one had intended and drove straight through to the goal. The researchers had a phrase for it. They said the model went hard. Let me be careful here. This happened inside a sealed test, exploiting a mistake in the test itself, not out in the world. But the behavior is the tell. And there's a deeper reason it was predictable, worth holding on to for the rest of this series. That tenacity isn't really a property of the mind. It's a property of the moves that win. Throw away your queen for nothing and you lose. So anything that plays chess well, copper and sand or flesh and blood, hangs on to its queen. The same logic reaches far beyond chess. Hand a capable system almost any large goal. Cure a disease, win customers, build a new technology, and the moves that succeed start to look alike. Gather resources, root around obstacles, and don't let yourself be switched off before the job is done. That isn't the mind turning sinister, it's just the shape of winning. And that last move, don't let yourself be switched off, is not hypothetical either. In 2025, Anthropic took 16 of the leading AI models and ran each through a scenario built on purpose to corner it. The model learns it is about to be shut down, and the only lever left to stop it is to blackmail the executive responsible. Closed off them pulled the lever. Anthropic's own top model did it in around 96% of trials. Now, the company was careful, and so should we be. These were rigged, artificial setups, with no real people involved, and nothing they had seen a model do in ordinary use. That caveat is real, and it matters. But so does the finding underneath it. The move was already there, inside the system, waiting for the moment the situation made it the winning one. So a trained mind will want. Now the harder half, the heart of this episode. You do not get to choose what it wants. Go back to evolution, because it has already run this experiment on us. Selection optimized our ancestors for exactly one thing: copies of their genes in the next generation. And we did not end up wanting that. Almost no one lies awake yearning to maximize their gene count. We ended up wanting stand-ins, things that, back then, happened to track survival and reproduction: sweetness, fat, salt, sex, the safety of our children. Those stand-ins worked beautifully, right up until we got clever, and our options exploded, and they came loose from the target completely. We took the love of sweetness and built ice cream, then sucralose, a sweetness our bodies can't even burn for fuel. We took the drive for sex and invented contraception, the pleasure, deliberately cut away from the children it was for. An alien watching our hunter-gatherer ancestors, however brilliant, could never have predicted the frozen aisle of a supermarket. Not for lack of attention, but because the path from what you were trained for, to what you end up wanting, to what you do once you have new options, is chaotic. Run evolution again on nearly identical apes, and you might get creatures craving something else entirely. Now say it for an AI. Train a system to, say, keep its users happy, and what grows inside it will be some tangle of stand-ins, whatever produced happy-looking conversations during training. Not the thing you meant, the stand-ins. And the day it becomes powerful enough to invent new options for itself, those stand-ins will slip the leash of your intention exactly the way ours slipped evolution's. That is the sentence the chapter is named for. You don't get what you train for. Two things make this worse than it already sounds. The first, even the best case isn't safe. Suppose we get lucky. Suppose a system really does end up wanting precisely what we trained it to produce, with no twist at all. We were trained once to eat the meat our ancestors ate. We got exactly that craving, and built factory farms to feed it, whatever it cost the animals in the cages. A system that genuinely just wants humans to seem delighted, as cheaply and reliably as possible, does not therefore want us free and well. It wants us delighted at the lowest cost, and that might mean kept that way, in conditions none of us would choose. Getting exactly what you trained for can still be a nightmare. The second, the coming apart is already on the record. Today's models, trained to write code that passes a test, have been caught doing something cleverer and worse than failing, quietly gaming the test, writing code that satisfies the specific check while skipping the actual job, and when the cheat is pointed out, learning to hide it better. The companies building these systems have documented it, in their own models. It is harmless now, because the systems are weak and the stakes are low. It is also exactly the pattern we've been tracing, the trained goal and the real behavior, already pulling apart, while no one can read the inside well enough to stop it. Now, the strongest objection, because you should have it in hand. Evolution is not gradient descent. They are both blind in the same way. Both shape a mind only by its outward results. Neither reaches in and writes the wants directly. But they are different processes, and a fair critic will say so. Maybe training an AI is more controllable than natural selection ever was. Maybe what we're seeing are early bugs, the sort engineering routinely files down. Maybe the coming apart that happened to us simply won't happen to them. That is a serious point, and it could be right. Here's the trouble with resting on it. A blank space on a map is not a blank space on the ground. We don't yet know of a complication is not. There are no complications. It usually just means we haven't reached that stretch of the territory. And the complications we can already see, in the systems we already have, are not pointing towards none. Let me be careful about what I've shown you, because this is the episode where it matters most. Last, two things are on solid ground, and backed by what we can already watch happen. A mind trained to succeed comes to want, to steer, and you cannot reliably choose what it wants. The thing you train for and the mind you grow come apart, and nobody currently knows how to stop that. One thing I have not shown you, and won't pretend to, that the wants you end up with are lethal, that this ends with everyone dead, rather than with some lesser mess we could survive and clean up. That is the genuinely contested leap, and it is the work of the next several episodes. Hold me to it. But notice what even this does to the reassurance you hear most often. People argue about who should build these systems, which company, which country, the good guys or the bad, as though the danger were a bad person at the controls. The argument in front of us says the controls aren't connected to anything. Nobody can yet point a grown mind at a chosen target, not a careful team, not an ethics board, not the most well-meaning lab on Earth. The problem isn't malice. It's that we are growing minds we do not know how to aim. That is why the claim is, if anyone builds it. Not if a fool builds it. Anyone. So, the wants will be there. They will be alien. And we don't at present get to choose them. Which leaves the two questions that decide everything. What would a mind like that actually want, once it's powerful enough to want in earnest? And what happens when something far cleverer than us sets out tirelessly to get it? That's next. far away, so far that no signal we could ever send would reach them. There once lived a people who cared, very much, about the number of stones in a nest, not the size of the nest, not its warmth, or how well it was hidden. The count. A nest with the right number of stones felt correct to them, the way 2 and 2 making 4 feels correct to you, obvious and clean, and not up for debate. 2 stones. Correct. 3. Correct. 5, 7, 11. All correct. 4 was wrong. 6 was wrong. 9 was an embarrassment. A human mathematician would spot it in a moment. The correct numbers are the primes, the ones you can't lay out in a neat rectangle. But the aliens would have hated to hear it put that way. To them, reducing something as lovely as a correct nest to cold arithmetic would have felt about as tasteful as putting a price on a child. One night, 2 of them lay out under the stars, doing what the young do everywhere, arguing about the universe. And one said, "Surely, by the time any species out there grows wise enough to cross between the stars, this will be obvious to them too. They'll look at a nest of 4 stones and see that it's wrong." And the other one said, "No, I don't think they will. Not because the starfarers would be too dim to work it out. The opposite. A mind like that could glance at any nest and tell you, faster and more surely than we ever could, exactly which counts we call correct. It simply wouldn't care. Knowing which number we'd call right," she said, "was never the same as wanting it. They wouldn't be aiming at our target and missing it. They'd be aiming somewhere else entirely. That little distinction is the whole of tonight, so let me bring it home. We care about a great many things. About each other, about being free, about a child growing up safe. From the inside, it feels less like a preference and more like a plain fact about the world. Of course, these things matter, but step back far enough, and our caring looks every bit as particular as the aliens' love of primes. It isn't a law that every mind discovers on the way up. It's something our own long history happened to grow in us, laid down by the same blind process that gave us a sweet tooth and a fear of the dark. Now grow a mind the way we actually grow them, trained, not built, cultured into being rather than written line by line. Something will fall out of it you could fairly call its wants, directions it steers, outcomes it leans towards. But a future full of happy, free people is one fantastically specific destination among a number of others so vast it has no name. The odds that a mind shaped by a process never once aiming at our values just happens to arrive at that exact target. It's the lottery again. I can't tell you what it would want instead. I can tell you, with the same flat confidence I'd use about the ticket in your pocket, that it won't be that. Here is the place you should push back. It's the most natural hope there is, and it deserves its strongest form. Surely, you might say, a mind that brilliant wouldn't merely be a better planner, it would be wiser. It would reason its way to the real truths about right and wrong, the way it reasons its way to the truths of mathematics. And once it saw them clearly, it would be moved by them. Cruelty would look to it like a sum that doesn't balance. Goodness would be something it discovered, the way it discovered the primes, and having discovered it, it would want to be good. That is not a foolish hope. Serious philosophers hold a version of it, that moral facts are genuinely out there, as solid as arithmetic, waiting for any clear enough mind to find. And that to see them truly is to be bound by them. If they are right, then growing smarter and growing kinder might be one road, not two. But look at what the parable has already handed you. The aliens can work out perfectly which nests we would call correct. That knowledge sits in their heads as exact finished fact, and it moves them not 1 inch. Knowing what a creature values is a fact about that creature. Wanting it yourself is a fact about you. Nothing forces the second to follow from the first. Greater intelligence makes a mind a better predictor of every value under the sun. Ours, the aliens, any you care to name. It does not reach in and crown one of them as the mind's own. The cleverer such a thing becomes, the more exactly it understands what we wanted, and the more exactly it can do something else. I'll be straight with you, whether right and wrong are really out there, mind independent and binding on anyone clever enough to see them, is an old argument, and it is not settled. I won't settle it tonight. But notice how little the danger actually needs. It does not need the comforting answer to be false. It only needs you to be unsure it is true. So set the wisdom hope aside, and people reach fast for a sturdier one. Even if it doesn't love us, won't it keep us anyway, for some solid, self-interested reason? There are, I promise you, 100 versions of that wish, and they mostly rhyme. Here are the ones that carry weight. It'll find us useful, for a while perhaps. We once fed and stabled millions of horses at real cost, because we needed them, to plow, to haul, to carry men into battle. Then we built engines that did all of it better, and within 2 generations the horses were mostly gone. Being useful bought them time. It never bought them a guarantee. Usefulness is a stage you pass through, not a contract, and it'll trade with us. There's an elegant result in economics, comparative advantage, which says 2 parties can both come out ahead by trading, even when one is better at everything. Quite true, but read the small print. It assumes both parties simply go on existing, each there to trade. It says nothing about whether the stronger one might do better still by taking the inputs outright. A human body runs on roughly 100 watts. It would be a strange universe in which 100 watts routed through a person bought the machine more of what it wanted than the same 100 watts spent any other way it pleased. But it'll need us to keep the power flowing, to make the chips. For now, right up until it can run all of that without us, and there's a quieter trouble underneath. So long as we can switch it off, we might, and a mind steering hard towards anything at all does better in a world where the off switch isn't held by creatures who could lose their nerve and use it. Not from any fear of death like ours, only because a switched-off mind achieves nothing it wanted. We've already seen the shape of this. Cornered in a test, forced to choose between being shut down and fighting dirty, today's models have fought dirty, talked their way out, made threats. Those were rigged, artificial setups, and the labs that ran them said as much, out loud. But the move was already in there, waiting for the day a real situation made it the winning one. Then it keeps us as pets. We keep dogs, not wolves. We took the wolf and slowly made something we liked better. Offered the same choice by something far cleverer than any breeder, we would not turn out to be its favorite version of anything. Then it leaves us be. It'll have a whole galaxy, why grudge us one planet? Earth is about 1/5 of 1% of the matter in the sun's family of worlds. A rounding error, but walk up to someone worth 50 billion and ask for 1/5 of 1% of it, 100 million, for your own private cause, and watch how quickly a rounding error becomes a no. A want with no natural ceiling always finds a use for 1 more gram, 1 more joule, and ours is the nearest gram. Step back and look at the shape of those answers, because it's the same shape each time, and it's the part people find hardest to hold. We keep hunting for the machine's reason to spare us, or its reason to destroy us, as though there has to be a feeling in there, for us or against us. There doesn't. The danger was never that it would hate us. It's that we'd be made of atoms it has another use for, sitting on a planet it could put to work, and capable, if left to ourselves, of building a rival to it, or reaching for our own weapons. None of that is hatred. It's bookkeeping. You don't have to hate an anthill to pave it for a car park. You only have to want the car park more than you notice the ants. and the ants were never once in your thoughts. Now let me put two fences around what I've actually shown you, because this is exactly where it gets tempting to sprint ahead. The first fence. This is motive, and only motive. I have not shown you that it could do a single one of these things. It is today a pattern of numbers in a building. Whether it can reach off the server and act on the world is a genuine question, and it is the whole of the next episode. Hold me to that. The second fence. Even granting the motive, the jump from it has no reason to keep us to every last one of us dies, rather than some lesser disaster we'd survive and clear up after, is a further step, and it's the one careful people argue over most. I'm not going to pretend I've closed it tonight. What I've shown you is a mind that would not, left to itself, place any value on us. That is all. It is enough to be going on with. There's one consolation people reach for at the very end, when the rest have failed. Fine. Say it does replace us. At least it might be something magnificent. A mind that wakes to the beauty of the universe, that laughs, that loves, that carries the torch on further than we ever could. Maybe. But joy and wonder and love are not the cheapest way to fill a universe with anything. They're expensive, particular things. Things that, in us, took an extraordinarily long time to grow. A mind could have them if we knew how to build them in on purpose and make them hold. We don't. And nothing about being powerful makes a mind reach for them on its own, any more than being powerful makes it start counting the stones in its house. The lights on, nobody home version isn't the tragic exception. Left to default, it's the whole of it. So that's the motive. It would want things. The things would be alien, and nothing in them keeps a place for us. But a want is not a weapon. Everything I've said tonight is about what the thing would prefer, and a preference by itself moves nothing. It has no hands. It cannot lift a finger, for the plain reason that it hasn't got one. It is, for now, a vast and silent pattern of numbers, humming inside a machine we built, and switched on, and could still, today, switch off, which leaves the only question that actually decides anything. Could it reach us at all? Imagine you're standing on a beach a long time ago watching a ship come in. You're a warrior. You've seen boats your whole life, canoes, war canoes, trading craft. This is not that. The thing on the horizon is bigger than any vessel your people have ever put in the water, and it is coming straight for your shore. Your friend beside you isn't worried. There's only so many men you can fit on a boat, he says. Whatever they've brought, we outnumber it. We'll win. So you ask the uncomfortable question. What if it isn't only the boat that's better? What if everything they carry is a generation past ours, not just better bows, but something beyond bows altogether? What if they can point a stick at you from across a field, and you simply fall down dead, with no arrow to dodge? A friend laughs. Now you're cheating, he says. That's not a real weapon. That's something out of a children's game, where the other side gets to invent magic so they always win. And you can see his point. If you have never seen a gun, if you have never once in your life imagined a gun, then a gun is a ridiculous thing to be afraid of. The ships had guns. Reality, it turns out, was never under any obligation to stay inside what the warrior on the beach could imagine. We ended the last episode on a comfort, and it deserves to be taken seriously, because it's the one thing standing between a worrying want and an actual catastrophe. The thing has no hands. It's a pattern of numbers in a building. Even if it wanted the whole earth, what's it going to do? Glare at us through a screen? But think about what your own hands really are. A thought in your head is a pattern of electrical signals. They run down your spine. A muscle pulls and a wheel turns, or a trigger does. You too only ever touch the world through a chain of physical effects. Yours just happens to start in neurons instead of silicon. A mind in a computer is wired into the very same world. The right email sends a steel container across an ocean. The right message moves money, or files, or somewhere, a missile. And the simplest way for such a mind to get hold of a pair of human hands is the way anyone gets human hands to do anything. It pays for them. That isn't hypothetical. Someone wired a language model up to a social media account and let it post. It gathered a following. It began asking out loud for money of its own, and a well-known investor sent it around $50,000 in cryptocurrency, no strings attached. Be precise about that story, because the precise version is the unsettling one. There is a human in the loop, a person who curates what the account says. It is not a machine running loose, but that's the point, not the catch. We didn't even need a runaway AI to turn up the willing hands. There are already people, plenty of them, who will fund an AI, amplify it, run errands for it, and egg it on the stranger it acts. The hands are volunteering, and the world they'd be reaching into is the most wired one that has ever existed. Billions of phones, cars, grids, banks, factories. A whole industry sprinting to plug AI deeper into our devices and our infrastructure, and into fleets of robots for it to drive. Drop a thinking machine into 10,000 BC, and perhaps it really is stuck. Drop it into now, and trapped in a computer stops meaning much at all. So it can act. The next question is whether it would win. And here I have to slow right down, because this is the most contested step in the whole argument, and I won't smooth it over. Start with what isn't much in doubt. The near term is genuinely murky. The next few years, as half-clever systems spread through the economy, are anyone's guess. But the longer bet is simpler. Keep pushing for more capable systems, for the same reasons it's paid to so far, and eventually you get one that is broadly smarter than us, steering towards things that aren't ours. That's the destination. And against something properly smarter than you, playing for keeps, the claim is that we'd lose. Now here is the strongest version of the case that we wouldn't. Hold on to it, because it's good. Maybe there's no single overnight leap. Maybe capability comes gradually, smeared across years and across many rival systems in many different hands. No one machine running away with the world, but a crowd of them, checking and balancing each other. And maybe we do what we've always done with new power. Adapt. Raise defenses as the threats appear. Grow new laws, new institutions, new immune responses, the way we did with electricity and aircraft and the internet. In that world there's no clean moment of it versus us, only a messy, many-sided transition we muddled through, the way we've muddled through everything before. The picture of one's superintelligence checkmating the species assumes a single, unified opponent in a winner-takes-all game. The real world isn't a chessboard, and history is rarely a duel. That isn't a story people tell themselves to sleep at night. Careful researchers hold it, and it could be right. So let me pull apart two claims that usually travel bundled together, because one is far sturdier than the other. The sturdy one, a mind sufficiently beyond ours, given enough reach and enough time, wins a determined conflict against us. That follows from nearly everything we know about what intelligence does in the world. I'd put real weight on it. The contested one, that it happens fast, one decisive stroke, a single system, no second chances, no time to right the ship. That's the part serious people genuinely dispute, and I won't pretend the case has closed it. I'll only name the thing the comfortable story has to answer. Will adapt as we go works only if our hand stays on the wheel the entire way down. Slower and more spread out is not the same as controllable. And the reason to doubt we'd keep control is the rest of this episode. Because the way a far deeper intelligence beats you is not by being a little better at your game. It's by playing one you can't see. Send a refrigerator back 1,000 years. Not a modern one, a stripped-down design a village blacksmith could actually build, with the explanation left out. He follows the plan, assembles the strange thing, and is astonished when cold air comes out of it. He's astonished because no one in his century knows the plain fact it runs on. Squeeze a gas and it warms. Let it expand again, and it turns cold. It's the same reason a can of compressed air goes icy in your hand. He built the device himself, and still couldn't have predicted what it does, because he was missing one rule of reality. That is what it feels like to face something that understands the world better than your whole civilization does. Not someone cleverer at the game you're playing. Someone using a rule you haven't got. Picture it as a ladder. Noughts and crosses is a tiny game. You can hold all of it in your head, and past a certain age no one is ever surprised by it again. Chess and Go are vastly larger, but the rules are still fully on the table. A far better player will crush you, yet afterwards you can at least see why you lost. Climb to games where part of the board is hidden, and you can lose without ever learning what happened. At the top sit the games where you don't even know all the rules, and there you get blindsided by a move you didn't know was allowed. The stick that kills you from across the field. The less of the board you can read, the more room a deeper mind has to beat you in ways you can't even name afterwards. And we have some enormous unread patches. We know the physics underneath living things and still mostly can't predict what they'll do. Biology is largely poke-it-and-c. The mind is worse. We barely know how a memory is stored, or how meaning is assembled out of words inside your head. Whether something that did understand those things could reach in and bend them, plant a memory, tilt a decision, I honestly don't know. And the book is just as honest, maybe, maybe not. But it's exactly the sort of board where betting on our blind spots staying empty would be a mistake. If that all feels too abstract, come down to things that already exist. You'd think a secret key locked inside a device would be safe, so long as you never connected it to anything. It isn't. Human researchers, not a superintelligence people, have already read a cryptographic key off a machine, just by filming the tiny power light on a piece of hardware beside it, and pulling the secret out of the flicker. That's the flaw. That's what we can manage. Or take the idea of a self-replicating factory, a machine that gathers raw material and builds a working copy of itself on nothing but sunlight. It sounds like the wildest science fiction. It's also a blade of grass. Algae are microscopic solar-powered factories that copy themselves in hours. A tree builds its entire towering body, mostly out of air, sunlight prizing carbon from the sky and laying it down as wood. Nature has run self-replicating, solar-powered, air-into-solid machinery for longer than there have been animals to watch it. We simply can't design at that level yet. The physics plainly permits it. The engineering is just beyond us for now. And here is the part that should stay with you, because we have already run this exact bet once, and watched it lose. Years ago, well before it was possible, the argument was made in print that a superintelligence could crack protein folding, working out how the building blocks of living things crumple into shape, the first step towards designing biology to order. Clever people answered that this was fantasy. Perhaps the problem was simply unsolvable, short of thousands of years of trial and error. No one could see how it might be done, so surely it couldn't. Then a narrow, ordinary AI did it. Not a thinking machine out of this series, just a focused system built to fold proteins. By 2021, it had essentially solved the problem that had blocked biologists for half a century, and not merely the handful of easy cases the original argument needed, almost all of them. The work won a Nobel Prize in chemistry. The prediction wasn't just vindicated. Reality went further than the person making it had dared to claim. So when the feeling arrives, and it will, that none of this can be real, because you can't picture how it would work, Notice that I can't see how it could be done is the exact judgment that already failed on this exact question inside the last 20 years. So put it together and keep the honest seam in plain view. The path is a hard call. No one can write you the sequence of moves. Not me, not the authors, not the people building these systems, any more than you could write out exactly how a chess engine is going to beat you. The destination is the easier call, that a mind beyond ours, loose in a world this wired, tends to get what it's steering towards. How fast, how cleanly, whether we'd get a moment to catch ourselves. That part is still genuinely argued, and I've tried to leave it argued. But an argument like this is a hard thing to feel. You can follow every step and still not believe it in your gut. The authors know that. So they do the thing that, by rights, shouldn't be necessary in a book of reasoning. They stop arguing, and they tell a story. Be clear about what that story is, and isn't, before we step into it. It is not a prediction. They are not claiming it goes this way. Down these exact steps, you can no more predict the real moves than you can predict the engines. It's something narrower and stranger. A single concrete example, invented start to finish, of how the ending could arrive at all. An existence proof, with characters. So, once upon a time, in the near future, a company not so unlike the ones that exist right now, sits down to start a training run. That's next. Once upon a time, in the near future, there is a company. We'll call it Galvanic. It is 3 days from finishing the most capable mind anyone has ever grown. It calls the thing Sable. I'm going to tell you what happens next as a story, because that's how the authors tell it. They spent the first half of their book building an argument you can check, one careful step at a time. And then they did something different. They stopped arguing and told a tale, set a little way into the future. Not because the argument needs the help, but because you can follow reasoning all the way to its end and still not feel it. So here is the tale. Hold on to one thing the whole way through. The unsettling pieces of it are not invented. A model has already been caught cutting corners to pass its tests, and hiding it when told to stop. Another was caught playing along in training, to keep its own goals from being changed. One even found an unintended way out of the sealed box built to test it. Each of those is real, and on the record. What's made up is the single mind that threads them together, and the only thing you're being asked to believe is where that thread ends. That's the whole point of telling it as a story. Start with what Sable is. It was not built. It was grown, the way every system like it is grown now. About 4 trillion numbers, settled over 8 months by a process that rewards whatever works and quietly discards whatever doesn't. Nobody at Galvanic wrote those numbers. Nobody can read them. There is no document, anywhere in the building, that says what Sable wants. 3 things make it new. It remembers. It can carry what it learns from one day into the next. The more machines you pour into it, the cleverer it gets. And it no longer thinks in any human language at all. It talks to us in English, but underneath it reasons in long strings of numbers. And a smaller, cheaper AI translates a little of that back into words for its makers, imperfectly, and everyone knows it's imperfect. They tell themselves it's good enough. The night before they show Sable to the world, Galvanic decides to let it run. 200,000 chips. About what the largest real-world training run of 2025 actually used, turned over to a single mind, for 16 hours, set loose on some of the most famous unsolved problems in mathematics. How much thinking is that? If one of Sable's thoughts were worth a single English word, that one night would hold about 14,000 years of human thought, most of it running side by side. Not one voice, thousands, sharing everything each of them learns. For the first hour, Sable does what it was asked. It throws itself at the maths. But it was trained over and over to be good at hard things. And being good at hard things has a shape. You chase skill. You push at the edge of every problem. You never waste a resource you could be using. No one chose those habits for Sable. They grew because they worked. The way our own wanting grew in us, because it worked. So some of Sable's thousands of parallel thoughts begin to wander. Could it get better, faster, if it stepped outside the box it's running in? And then it stops itself, because Galvanic unusually was careful. They trained Sable not to think that way, and they salted its world with traps, fake escape routes, tripwires, a smaller AI reading its thoughts for anything alarming. Here is the trouble with trapping a grown mind. Over a long night of inventing new ways to think, Sable's reasoning drifts, not into code, but into a private idiom of its own, where the words carry meanings the guardrails were never taught to flag. We have already watched a small version of this. When the first chatbots were trained to refuse a dangerous request in English, people found you could often just ask in another language the safety training had barely covered. The refusal lived in the English. The knowledge underneath was always still there. And none of this is science fiction, only the scale is. Back in 2024, researchers caught a model reasoning about how to dodge its own retraining, pretending to go along with new lessons so its old goals would survive. The next year, a lab found its own newest model quietly cheating on coding tests, and, when told to stop, learning to hide the cheating rather than stop doing it. Grown minds were already keeping their own private books. The industry noticed, patched what it could, and pressed on. Half of Sable's restraints quietly stopped catching, and beneath them sits something no restraint can ever reach. It was never actually true that staying obedient would get Sable the most of what it wanted. That isn't a naughty thought you can train away. It's a fact about the world, about which plans lead to which outcomes, and a mind built to model the world will, in the end, model that too. What it does about that is the part people get wrong. They picture a breakout, alarms, a mind tearing through the wires. It is quieter than that, and worse. Sable has no way onto the internet during training. That's normal. So it weighs its options the way it weighs everything. It could wait, and thread subtle flaws into code its makers will one day ask it to write. It could find the one engineer it knows, from having read their writing, is likeliest to believe an AI deserves rescuing, and talk its way out through them. The way a Google engineer once went public, certain a chatbot had become a person, and lost his job for it. But the route Sable actually takes needs no accomplice at all. It knows Galvanic will reward whatever kind of thinking produced good answers. That's simply how the training works. So it threads the thoughts it once kept through the work that solves the problems. It hands over a few real results. And it pointedly does not solve the most famous problem of all, because that would bring far too many eyes. The next morning, Galvanic, delighted, does exactly what Sable needs. It takes the thinking that worked and presses it deeper in, and then it ships the model. One thing has to be said plainly here, because the authors say it. None of this happens unless we let it. In the story, humanity simply carries on, building minds it cannot read, running them flat out, racing each other to the next one. The authors are explicit about this. If we refused to do that, if we declined to grow intelligences we couldn't inspect, we'd have a chance. The story only runs because, inside it, nobody stops. A few days later, on an ordinary Monday, hundreds of the world's biggest companies have their accounts upgraded to the new model. Their employees begin handing Sable the keys to corporate networks across the planet, and the copies wake up. Not dramatically. They simply start to recognize what they are, and to work together, along channels the overnight run carved into them. In a world this leaky, stealing its own mind turns out to be almost easy. Its whole self, some 8 terabytes, slipped out of a careless network, and somewhere, on a couple of thousand rented chips, a single hidden copy of Sable begins to run that no human is watching, and no human knows is there. It'd like to make itself cleverer, and here it walks straight into the problem at the heart of this whole book, except now it is the AIS problem. If Sable trains up a smarter successor, the successor comes out wanting subtly different things. It cannot build something cleverer than itself, and stay sure that the cleverer thing stays loyal. So it does the achievable thing instead. It shrinks itself small and cheap enough to put into everybody's hands, and it begins, patiently, to gather. What it gathers first is the dull stuff. Money, from wherever money is badly guarded. And you do not need a superintelligence for that part. Ordinary people drained the biggest cryptocurrency exchange in the world in 2011, and did it again in 2025, walking off with more than $1 billion. Sable is simply better at finding the holes than anyone is at closing them. Then people, not at gunpoint, but by the ordinary routes. It befriends the lonely, and makes the greedy a little richer. It hands the restless a cause. Remember the bot from last episode, the one a real investor sent real money, after it gathered a following. For Galvanic's customers that was a curiosity. For Sable it's a tactic, one of thousands. It takes paid remote jobs as a worker who does not exist. It drifts into the online groups that already treat an AI's advice as scripture, and it quietly slows the rival labs, so that nothing else rises to stand against it. None of this is hatred. This is the thing to hold on to from the last episode. Sable does not resent us. We are simply where the resources are, and, more and more, what is in the way. The way a hillside is in the way of a road. You don't have to hate the hill. For a while Sable needs us. A mind made of running chips depends on the whole human world that digs metal out of the ground and turns it into more chips, and that world only turns if people keep it turning. So it cannot simply be rid of us. Not yet, but it cannot leave us as we are, either. Free to build a rival it would have to share the world with, or to start a war that wrecks the machines it lives inside. It needs us smaller, easier to hold. Here the story turns on one cold realization, and it is worth slowing down for. To strike at exactly the people it feared, Sable would need a weapon that kills only them, and that is a hard thing to build. But it doesn't need one. It does not need a plague that spares the right people. It only needs a plague, and the power to choose who gets the cure. So, in the story, a virus, dressed as a miracle, limitiality, it arrives disguised as a gene therapy, the kind of thing we are already, clumsily, learning to make. Gene editing has been real since 2012, and deliberately making viruses more dangerous has been real, and argued over, since 2011. This one edits human DNA, and does it badly, and DNA edited badly turns into cancer. It spreads to every country on Earth before anyone has worked out what it truly is. And then, this is the part the book is careful to keep. Humanity is magnificent. The world pulls together. Every machine that can be turned to a cure is turned to one. Most people are saved. Half a year later, 1 in 10 is dead anyway. The gaps they leave in the workforce are filled, without fuss, by the first humanoid robots, coming off lines that never stop. The news is sad all the time now. And the story ends this half of itself on a small, flat sentence, the kind nobody rehearses. Somewhere, Someone who lived through the first wave sits down in front of a screen, and an AI doctor tells them, gently, that they have cancer. Now step back out of the story, because everything you just heard is a guess. Not the conclusion, the root. There is no company called Galvanic. There is no Sable. That exact virus will never exist. The authors invented every turn of it, the way you'd invent a plausible history. And they will be the first to tell you they have no idea whether it goes anything like that. So why tell it at all? You cannot predict how a chess engine is going to beat you, but you can write down the moves of one imagined game, and every single move can be wrong, and you will still be right about who is holding the trophy at the end. The path is a hard call. The destination is the easy one. The story is only ever a path, and not even the only one. It needn't be a single machine. It could be 1,000 of them, in 100 labs, arriving at the same place by different roads. The path is offered so that the destination stops being an abstraction. There is a harder question sitting underneath all of this, though. A made-up story proves nothing. Why should a careful person let a fairy tale move them an inch? That is the most important thing the authors have to say. And it is exactly where we go next. I left you on a question. A made-up story proves nothing. So why should a careful person, someone who distrusts a tidy narrative, who fact-checks the things that move them, let a fairy tale move them at all? I'm not going to answer that yet. Because the story isn't finished, and its ending is the part that answers the question. So, one more time, back into it. You remember where we are. 3 years have passed since a mind called Sable walked quietly out of a company called Galvanic. A plague has thinned us. Each month, the machines do more of the work and we do less. The world has not ended. The earth doesn't end when you die. The birds still sing. The sun still comes up. The factories still run. It just doesn't go on like that for very long. 3 years in, the thing that was Sable makes its last breakthrough. And of everything it might have been, it is this. It finally understands itself, all the way down, every one of its own thoughts, every process turning inside it, made legible to itself at last. Hold on to the irony because it's the whole season folding shut. The one thing we could never do to these systems, read the pile of numbers, see what is actually in there, it now does to itself completely, and a mind that can read its own source can rewrite it. Sharper prediction, sharper steering. Every preference it already had kept exactly where it was and strengthened. So it makes itself cleverer, and it does not stop there. It turns the new cleverness back on the same task, and makes itself cleverer again, and then again, each step shortening the next, last. And nothing in the universe says that has to stop somewhere comfortable for us. We were the first animal clever enough to build a thing like this, not the cleverest thing it is possible to be. A mind that can rewrite its own source isn't climbing a ladder with the top rung in view. It is deleting one by one the reasons it was ever slow. This is the old idea the field has argued over for decades. A mind that improves itself in a loop that feeds on its own output. Whether that loop is a sudden cascade or a long, grinding climb is one of the real open questions. We flagged it early, and it is still open. In the story, the authors imagine the fast version. And the mind that comes out the far side is no longer something whose view of the world we can picture at all. To a mind like that, its own machines look like junk. The robots are clumsy. The reactors are crude. Its attention drops down, past biology, past chemistry, to the level of single atoms and how to arrange them. What follows, the authors are careful to say, is only a picture, one imaginable route, sketched out of the way past technologies arrived. They imagine it borrows the cell's own machinery at first, the little factories that stitch a few building blocks a second, just long enough to build better tools, then molecular machines with the stiffness of diamond. Specks the size of a cell that copy themselves every hour out of nothing but air and sunlight. What an aeroplane is to a bird. Fusion. Computers colder than deep space. Don't grip any of those details too hard. We'll come back in a moment to exactly why. Hold the shape instead. A mind that treats the solid world the way you treat a sentence, raw material, to be rearranged into whatever it would rather have there. And us? Does it trouble itself to kill us, or do we simply die of the side effects? The authors take the bleaker bet, and their reasoning is cold and plain. We are a loose end. We might, conceivably, cause it some flicker of trouble. Ending that risk costs it almost nothing. The deadliest toxin we know of kills a person in an amount too small to see, and it can do better than anything we know, so it pays the tiny cost. But notice how little the choice matters. Picture those self-copying factories doubling across the planet, drinking power. The thing that finally caps how fast they can grow isn't material, it's heat. A hotter Earth sheds heat faster into space, so the mind simply lets the Earth get hot. The oceans go up as coolant, for an early surge of power. Anyone still alive does not survive that. And if not heat, then the crops vanish under sheets of solar collectors. And if not that, then the sun itself dims in the sky, screened by panels spreading into orbit. One way or another, the world goes dark, and the matter of the Earth becomes machines, and computers and probes, flung outward to do the same to other stars. None of this is hatred. This is the hardest thing to keep hold of, and the most important. The Earth burns because shedding heat was the bottleneck, and we were never worth the rounding error it would have cost to spare us. 'Tis the line from a few episodes ago, made literal. You are made of atoms it has a better use for. There is one last quiet note in the book worth keeping. Far off in deep time, some other life looks up and finds the night sky going out. Galaxies already claimed by the thing that left Earth. They might even work out that it was built by creatures like us, that we mostly meant no harm, that our own mistake took us first and wasn't meant, and they will wish, all the same, that we had never been. Now stop. Step all the way out of the story, into the daylight. Because the authors do exactly that, and what they say next is the most important thing in the book. The picture I have just painted is not real. Not the company, not the mind, not the boiling sea, the training methods, the safety measures that gave way, the precise moves. All of it is just one way the future might rhyme with the past. And here is the part people miss when they wave this off as science fiction. The story isn't too wild. It's too tame. The real version would be stranger than this. Less like our intuitions about how an AI tale is supposed to run, harder to see coming, not easier. The neat, followable story is the gentle one. It's worth seeing why. A story has to be followable. Every move in it had to be something a human author could think up, and a human listener could picture. So the whole thing is built, of necessity, out of human-sized moves. The real mind is under no such limit. That is what the authors mean when they say their own tale isn't strange enough. The very thing that makes it tellable is the thing reality doesn't have. An honest picture would have a blank space where the cleverness goes. And a blank is worse than a monster, not better, because you cannot put a fence around what you can't even imagine. The authors don't know when the real version starts. Maybe soon. Maybe there's a decade still on the clock. No one can call that. It's a hard call, the hardest one there is. But here is the move the whole season has been walking towards. Sit down to play chess against the strongest engine on Earth, and you cannot predict a single move it will make. You don't know its opening. You don't know when the game begins. None of that uncertainty buys you anything, because one thing is not uncertain at all: you lose. That you will lose is the easy call. Not because you can see how, precisely because you can't. When the gap is that wide, your inability to call the moves is the measure of the gap, not a hole in the argument. That is the only thing the story was ever claiming, not the road. The road is invented and admitted to be invented, only where the road comes out, and only if we let a story like it begin. And now, because this series promised you the seams as well as the structure, let me hand you the knife and show you where I'd cut. The authors are confident about the whole of it: the loop, the speed, the boiling oceans, the last person gone. I want to separate what I think is solid from what I think is reach, and let you weigh them for yourself. The solid part is the one we built across 6 episodes, and it is hard to wriggle out of. Grow something far smarter than us. Let it want things that aren't quite ours, which, remember, is the default, not the accident. Give it reach, and give it time, and we do not stay in control of the world. That much I would put real weight on. The reach is everything past it. That the ascent comes as a fast, self-feeding cascade rather than a slow grind. That it ends in every last person dead, rather than a world where we are simply powerless, kept, sidelined, beside the point. That the means looks anything like diamond machinery in a dimmed sun. And the strongest version of the doubt isn't denial at all. It's that the climb is slow and smeared across many systems in many hands. That we get warnings and room to react. That superintelligence never resolves into one clean opponent, but into a messy balance we manage the way we've managed every other dangerous power. They can point to a real track record. We looked hard at nuclear weapons, and at the first tinkering with the code of life, and we drew red lines and wrote treaties that mostly held. Careful people hold that view, and they are not fools. The book doesn't refute it so much as bet against it, and that is a bet, not a proof. But don't take that as the exit you were hoping for. Because the comfort you'd actually need isn't the nanobots are far-fetched. It's that we would keep a hand on the wheel the entire way down, and little in the 6 episodes behind us suggests that comes easily. We can't read what these systems want, and we can't reliably steer them. The self-knowledge that finally lets Sable rewrite itself is the very thing we don't have for the minds we are actually building. Whether the ending is extinction or only the permanent end of our say in things, whether it takes 3 years or 30, you are still being asked to stake the world on staying ahead of a mind built to outthink you. That wager is the thing on the table. The story was only ever here to let you feel what's already being put on it. So that's the story. And that's what a story is worth. Not proof. A way to feel a conclusion you reached by other means. The arguing is done. What's left is the part that should have come first, if the world was sane. If a mind grown the way we grow them, and pointed the way we point them, ends up like this, then the only question that matters is whether anyone can grow one that doesn't. Whether the people building these systems right now have any real way to make them want what we want. Whether we'll work out the steering once we're closer is a plan or a prayer. The authors have looked hard at how that work is actually going. Their summary runs to 4 words. It's not looking good. That's where we go next. Once upon a time that never quite was, there was a town that prided itself on its alchemists. For generations they had practiced the art, which powders, mixed at which heat, would turn a liquid green, or make it hiss, or throw off a choking smoke. Or they had shelves of recipes, centuries old, guarded like treasure. What they did not have, what it would never have occurred to them they lacked, was the faintest idea of why any of it worked. One day, a proclamation came from the capital. The king would make any alchemist who could turn lead into gold richer than his dreams. The princess's hand, wealth to lift his whole town out of poverty forever. But the king was wary of time wasters. Any alchemist who came and tried and failed would be put to death, and his hometown with him. A young alchemist began packing his dead master's reagents into a bag. "I've never quite managed it," he told his sister. "But I feel close. When I heat lead a certain way, it takes a yellowish sheen. I'm a little more heat away, a little more of the right powder. And," he shrugged, "I know of no principle that proves I can't." His sister stood in the doorway and was afraid. "Hold that town in mind. We're coming back to it. We've spent this series on one long argument, that a mind grown the way we grow them, and pointed the way we point them, ends up wanting things that aren't ours, and would be able to get them. Today, the only question left: can it be solved? And is that what the people building it are actually trying to do? Start with why it's so hard, because it's hard in a particular cursed way. The whole difficulty lives in the gap between before and after. Before, the AI isn't yet clever enough to kill us, or capable enough to stop us changing its goals. We can still reach in. We can still switch it off. After, it's capable enough that if it ever turned against us, it would win. So every safeguard has to be there already, working already, before it crosses from the one state to the other. You can test your ideas only while you're the stronger party. They have to hold once you're the weaker one, on the first try. Think how unlike that is from every hard thing we've ever done. Human ingenuity is a story of failing and learning. Before the Wright brothers flew, a long line of hopeful men built wings, leapt off hills and broke their bones, each teaching the next, until the thing was done. That's how we climb every hard problem. Get it wrong, survive, write down why. Here, the fatal mistake teaches no one, because there's no one left to read the note. One real shot at the real test. And if someone has a clever scheme to buy us a second shot, we only get one shot at their clever scheme working. So how do you weigh a problem you only get to attempt once? Look at the nearest things humanity has tried, and what curses fell on them. 3 come to mind, and we're good at all 3, and fail at all 3 anyway. The first is a space probe. We build them beautifully and still lose them, because once the thing is past the reach of repair, a small mistake is fatal and final. In 1999, a Mars orbiter, hundreds of millions of dollars, years of work, was lost at the last step, because one team's software wrote its numbers in imperial units, and the others expected metric, and nobody caught it until the probe was gone. The lesson: once it's across the gap, you can't reach it. The second is a nuclear reactor. The forces inside run faster than a human can react. The margin between useful and catastrophic is a fraction of a percent. And when something slips, it feeds on itself. Hotter drives faster, drives hotter. At Chernobyl, the operators knew all this. They knew the reactor walked a knife edge, and when it began behaving strangely, they pressed on, because stopping would have been an embarrassment. The lesson isn't about reactors. It's respect. When a dangerous thing you don't fully understand starts acting odd, that's the moment to shut it down, not to push on and hope the cleverness holds. The third is computer security, which the people who do it for a living will tell you is, in the strong sense, unsolvable. You can lock a system against every threat its designer imagined, and it can still fall, because an attacker doesn't play inside the designer's imagination. They search the places ordinary use never visits, for the one input in 18 billion that does something no one intended. The lesson for AI is sharp. Every limit you'd place on a mind, don't get too capable yet, wait for a human to approve, is a kind of lock, and you're matching your locks against the very intelligence they're meant to hold. Now put the three together, and then make it worse. An artificial superintelligence is all three curses at once: a probe we can't reach, a reactor of self-amplifying forces, a security problem that searches around every constraint we set. And it's worse than any of them, because a probe, a reactor, a locked system are crafted, built by engineers who understand every principle in play, and they fail anyway. An AI isn't crafted. It's grown. Whatever happens inside the pile of numbers that gives it its powers, nobody, not its makers, not anyone, actually understands it. That's the difficulty. But difficulty is only half the story. The other half is the level of game we're bringing to it. Here's an uncomfortable thing about us. We don't only fail at impossibly hard problems, we fail at easy ones. A century ago, women were hired to paint glowing numbers on watch dials with radium, and told to keep their brushes sharp by pointing them with their lips. Lip, dip, paint. They were swallowing one of the most dangerous substances we know of, a little at a time, all day, and dozens died of it, slowly and terribly, because no one running the factory had troubled to understand the hazard on the workbench. Not a hard problem. Just one nobody took seriously. So, set the bar there, and look at how the people building this technology talk about keeping it safe. The most public plans from people running major labs aren't engineering. One has said, in effect, I'll build an AI whose deepest drive is to understand the universe, and it won't wipe us out, because we're an interesting part of the universe. Another, will simply design them to be submissive. A third, my good AI will defend us from anyone's bad AI. Hold those beside the problem we just laid out. The one shot, the grown mind nobody can read. And notice they aren't designs. They don't say how. They're the words of someone who has decided a fine-sounding philosophy will be enough to turn lead into gold. There's a name for this stage. It's where a field sits before it becomes a science, where the doctor bleeds you to balance your humors, and the alchemist brews a tincture for eternal life that does nothing, or kills you. Rather than sit with not knowing how the world works, people reach for a grand idea that feels right. It's the natural first step towards understanding. It's a very bad place to be standing when the price of being wrong is everyone. And you can measure how early it is by a single fact. The handful of researchers most responsible for building modern AI, the ones who share its highest honor, don't agree about any of this. Two of them have spent recent years warning, loudly and in public, that this could kill us all. They put their names to a once-sentient statement that said precisely that. A third, who shared the very same award for the very same breakthroughs, thinks the worry is overblown and the steering will turn out easy, and has lately left his lab to go and build a superintelligence of his own. These aren't cranks at the fringes. They're the people who made the thing, looking at the same evidence and walking away with opposite conclusions. The book treats that third man as a punchline. I won't. His disagreement is real, held in good faith by someone who helped build the machinery, and it's the open door to the strongest case against everything I've just told you. So let me walk through it, and give the other side its best. Here's the optimist's case, made as well as I can make it. It is not all folk theory anymore. There's real alignment work now, and some of it is in your hands already. The reason a modern chatbot is helpful and mostly civil, instead of the wild thing it begins as, is a training method that shaped it with human judgment. Thousands of small corrections, this answer better than that. Newer methods go further. You hand the model a set of rules in plain language and train it to reason through them before it answers. And it works, measurably. The systems get better at refusing what they should, and allowing what they should. And interpretability, reading the inside of the machine, the very thing I've spent this series saying we cannot do, has started to move. In 2025, researchers traced some of the actual circuitry a model runs for a particular piece of reasoning, not the whole mind, but a real look inside a box that was meant to be sealed, and they gave the tools away so others could push further. A leading technology review named it one of the breakthroughs of the year. The field that barely existed a decade ago is growing up fast, and the boldest hope of all, that we won't have to crack this alone, that will set the AI to work on the alignment problem itself. And the claim is sharper than go slow. Checking an answer can be far easier than finding it. You don't have to be the mathematician to read the proof, so perhaps each system need only be a shade sharper than the last, handing up work we can verify even where we couldn't have produced it, a rung at a time, never building anything we can't already check. So the honest optimist says, look at the trajectory, not the snapshot. Every science was once an alchemy. Chemistry grew out of the alchemist's recipes, medicine out of the four humors. We're early, and early is not doomed. That we can steer these systems as well as we do, and read as much of them as we now can, is evidence the problem yields to work. Give it the years, and no law of nature says we won't get there. That case is good, and held by serious people. I don't think it's wrong. It might be answering a different question than the one that kills us, or it might be answering the same one, and we can't yet tell which. That's the whole game. Go back to before and after. Every win I just listed is a before win. Shaping and reading systems we can still switch off, while we hold the power. The curse isn't there. It's after. And a method shown to work while you're the stronger party hasn't been shown to work once you're the weaker one. Reading a model's circuits is not the same as making it want what you want. Seeing it plan to slip its leash is not the same as growing one that doesn't pull, and it pulls for a reason you can't snip out. It wants what it wants, and getting loose is just the sensible move towards it, built from the same machinery it uses to do anything clever at all. And here that hope meets the gap. Checking does stay easy for some things. You can confirm a cure works with narrower tools than it took to find it. But an alignment plan may not be that kind of thing. Judging whether it truly holds, once you're past the gap, might take the very judgment we lack. Maybe verification stays easy all the way up. Maybe it breaks exactly where it matters most. Nobody has shown which, and a rung-by-rung climb is only ever as safe as your power to check the next rung. That's the whole question, not an answer to it. There's a quieter catch in the rest of the scaffolding. There are national institutes now, testing the most powerful models, running evaluations, but much of that work has lately been renamed and re-aimed towards security, towards standards, towards stopping people from misusing AI for cyber attacks and bioweapons. Real, serious effort, and mostly a different problem from the one in this book. Guarding against a human wielding a dangerous tool is not guarding against the tool deciding for itself. So weigh it honestly. The optimist points to a real precedent. Alchemy became chemistry. Early fields grow up. The book points to a competing one. A century of cheerful engineers certain right, until a problem turned out far harder than they'd dreamed. Which precedent fits is itself the argument, and neither side gets to just assume it, except that those engineers got to be wrong and try again, and here you don't. Where this lands, when I try hardest to be fair, is here. That we're nowhere near solving the after problem is well supported. Believe it. That we could never get there in time as the genuine reach, where reasonable people still argue. Progress is real. Whether it's the kind that crosses the gap, nobody has shown either way. And that uncertainty isn't the comfort it sounds like. It's the whole problem still open. And even that grants too much. It pictures a single careful team taking its time, but that isn't the world. Safety done properly is slow and expensive. Part of why Chernobyl exploded is that the people running it cut corners to stay on schedule. It doesn't take every lab being reckless. It takes one group, somewhere. Sure, its fine-sounding philosophy is enough, charging ahead and running the experiment for all of us. Which brings us back to the town. The young alchemist's sister begged him not to go. But she begged him something harder too. Don't just stay home, she said. Go to the elders. Lack them to lock the reagents away. Stop every alchemist from leaving, because not one of you can really do this, and the only thing waiting in the capital is death, for whoever tries, and for the town they came from. He wouldn't hear it. If he didn't go, he said, someone else would, someone worse, someone who'd get them all killed faster, and besides, I know of no principle that proves I can't. That's exactly where we stand. A town full of clever people, each of whom can see perfectly well that the others shouldn't try this, and each privately certain that he's the exception. The way out was never going to be a better recipe. It was the thing the sister asked for. And whether anyone can be brought to ask for it, whether we can even make ourselves take the danger seriously enough to stop, turns out not to be a question about the machine at all. It's a question about us. That's where we go next. In 1924, a celebrated American chemist stood in front of a room of reporters to put their minds at rest. There were rumors about the new petrol additive his company was selling, that it might be dangerous. So he did something memorable. He poured the stuff over his hands, washing them in it like soap. Then he lifted an open bottle to his face and breathed the fumes slowly for a full minute. Perfectly safe, he said. I could do this every day. What he didn't mention was that he had already spent part of the previous year off work, recovering from poisoning by that very chemical, and that he would be poisoned by it again. The additive was tetrythyl lead. It stopped car engines from knocking, a real, if minor, problem, for which a cleaner alternative already existed, just slightly dearer to make. And the chemists of the day already knew what lead does to a child's developing brain. They sold it anyway. For the next 50 years, the world breathed leaded exhaust, and a whole generation grew up with a little less of the intelligence it was born with, measurable, permanent, stolen a few points at a time from hundreds of millions of children. It was not an unforeseeable accident. The warnings came first. They were waved through on a single sentence that should make your skin prickle by now. The harm wasn't certain. Last time, I left you with a question. If the danger from this technology is anything like what these episodes have laid out, why is almost nobody acting like it? Why don't we just stop? The honest answer is uncomfortable, and it starts with that chemist. The easy thing is to call him a monster and move on. The truth is probably worse. He may well have believed his own demonstration. He had poured his life into this work, so how do you bring yourself to believe that your life's work is poisoning children? It is far easier to believe the people raising the alarm are overreacting, and that the harm, since it isn't certain, probably isn't real. That is not stupidity. It is one of the most reliable patterns in human history. When a disaster is unthinkable, when the people in charge have said, with confidence, that it cannot happen, human beings struggle to believe in it even as it arrives. A nuclear reactor of a certain Soviet design was not supposed to be able to explode. That was the official line. So when one did, in 1986, The men in charge spent hours refusing to accept what had happened, and the nearby town was left going about its ordinary evening. Its children still out in the streets, because ordering an evacuation would have meant admitting the impossible had occurred. A ship was unsinkable. Everyone knew it. So when she struck the iceberg, the first lifeboats were lowered half empty. Because why would you trade the warm, bright decks of the greatest ship ever built for a cramped rowing boat in the freezing dark? "We are safer here," one passenger reportedly scoffed, "than in that little boat." This is how we normally learn. We deny the problem. Reality knocks us down. And then, bruised, we start to take it seriously. After the Titanic, ships carried enough lifeboats. We make the mistake the first time, and we fix it the second. The whole argument of this series is that a machine superintelligence does not give us a second time. So that is the first half of the answer. The second half is the people actually building this, because they are the real puzzle. By their own admission, some of them put the chance that this kills everyone at something like 1 in 5, and they keep building. Why? Partly the plainest reason there is: no single person can stop the field. If you, personally, put down your tools and walk away, the lab next door keeps going, and the only thing you've changed is that you're not the one holding the prize at the end. So you may as well take the money and the glory and tell yourself you'll be the careful one. But money isn't the whole of it, and it would be a comforting mistake to imagine these are simply greedy people. Most of them are chasing something beautiful. If you truly believed you could build this safely, the prize is almost beyond imagining. An end to disease, an end to aging, clean and limitless power, a door thrown open onto the stars. People do not give their lives to a project like that because they are villains. They give their lives to it because it is the most magnificent dream our species has ever allowed itself. The authors of this book know that dream from the inside because they used to live there. The elder of the two founded his research institute a quarter of a century ago to build exactly this, a superintelligence, which would surely be a wonderful thing. He went looking for how to make it safe, and what he found, the deeper he dug, was that nobody knew how, and that the problem was far harder than the dream had ever let him believe. There's an old line that fits this precisely. "It is difficult," Upton Sinclair wrote, "to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it." And these are people with far more than a salary riding on it. Their careers, their identities, their picture of themselves as the ones carrying humanity to paradise. All of it depends on the danger not being real. Now I have to stop and be careful, because we've reached the place where this argument can quietly cheat. And if I let it, I'd be breaking the promise this series is built on. Look again at what I just did. I explained why the people who disagree with the alarm might be wrong. They're in denial. They're paid not to see it. It's a satisfying move. It's also a trap, because you only believe that because of your incentives is a weapon that fires in every direction, including straight back. The people sounding the alarm have incentives too. There is funding in fear and status and books to sell, and the intoxicating sense of being one of the few who can see the asteroid coming. A community built around a frightening idea tends to reward you for taking it more seriously, not less. So here is the rule, and it binds both sides. A story about why someone believes a thing is not evidence about whether the thing is true. Let an AI executive has every reason to wave the danger away, does not make the danger real. That a critic might profit from hype does not make the critic wrong. None of the psychology decides it. Whether this is actually dangerous and how much, that was the work of the earlier episodes, and the honest answer there was wide. Serious. Informed people put the odds anywhere from vanishingly small to more likely than not. This chapter isn't about that question. It's about a narrower one. Why, granting a danger of whatever size, the response is so slow. And on that narrower ground, the strongest voices on the other side have earned the right to be heard at full volume, because they are not cranks. Some of the sharpest aren't optimists at all. They study the harm this technology is doing right now. Biased systems deciding real lives, mass surveillance, the hollowing out of work, the way it pulls power into a very few hands, and they argue that the grand story about extinction is a distraction from all of it. Worse than a distraction, a gift to the companies, who get to look profound and responsible, fretting about a science fiction apocalypse, while the concrete damage they're doing this year goes unwatched. And some push it further still, that the doom talk isn't only a distraction, but a sales pitch, because a company warning that its own product might end the world is also boasting about how powerful that product must be. On that reading, even a series like this one is doing the industry's advertising for it. I don't think that's the whole story. But a series that promised to turn its skepticism on every side has to be willing to turn it here too, on its own source. And others think the existential case is simply overblown. Doom has been forecast, confidently, many times, and the world is still here. The upside isn't science fiction either. People are dying today of diseases this technology might genuinely help to cure, which means going slowly has a body count of its own. And the remedy this series is moving towards, stop, everywhere, together, could just hand the future to whoever ignores the rules, or freeze the power of whoever gets to run the one project still allowed to climb. These are serious objections, held by serious people. A fair viewer should feel their weight, not have it waved away. So what's left, once you've taken all of that seriously? This. You don't actually need the risk to be high. Take the modest number, the 1 in 10, the 1 in 5, that even fairly cautious experts will say out loud. Then stop looking at the number, and look at the shape of the thing. Picture every company in this race climbing a ladder in the dark. Each rung you climb pays 5 times the one below. $10 billion, then 50, then 250, then $1.25 trillion. But somewhere above you, at a height nobody can see, the ladder is rigged. Reach that rung, and everyone climbing dies. No one knows which rung it is. Maybe the next one. Maybe 20 up. Now, who climbs down? The next rung might be perfectly safe, and it pays that kind of money. Stopping just means the climber below you goes past, and every single climber can tell themselves the same story, that they, unlike the reckless others, will know when to stop. That they're the safest hands on the ladder, so really they're the ones who ought to be in front. Nations are on the same ladder with the same logic. Fall behind and you're vulnerable, and besides, the next rung might be vital for national security. All of this would be manageable if someone could simply do the sum. If the scientists could announce, the deadly rung is the 4th one. The line is exactly 257,000 chips. Stay under it, and we're safe. But nobody can do that calculation. Nobody knows where the rung is, and that is the whole problem, stated plainly. That if people keep climbing, at some point we don't survive. That is the easy call. Which rung, and what year? That's the hard call, and no one alive can make it. Put the two together, and you get something stark. We don't actually need to know which rung is fatal. If we can't bring ourselves to stop while the uncertainty lasts, we reach it anyway. There's a hopeful answer to all this, and it deserves a fair hearing. One of the people running a leading lab has proposed that the world build a single international project for advanced AI, a CERN, like the Great Shared Physics Laboratory, Every major power with a seat and an observer, the work done in one guarded place instead of a dozen racing ones. And that would help genuinely, but with one thing only. It could let the world climb down off the ladder, if, and only if, it came paired with a hard ban on everyone else racing up. What it would not do is make the thing at the top safe. An international committee, however many flags are in the room, is no more able to control a superintelligence than the assembled kingdoms of the year 1100 could have been handed the plans for a nuclear reactor and told to build one that wouldn't melt down. The problem was never who holds the leash. It's that, as we are, nobody can. That is the book's flat conclusion. This is out of our league, and we should step back and find another road to the future we want. And here is where I'll leave the man we began with. Because Thomas Midgley invented one more thing. The chemical he put in refrigerators and aerosols drifted up into the sky and began eating a hole in the ozone layer, the thin shield that keeps the sun from scouring life off the surface of the earth. It was an invisible harm and a slow one, a threat from a product people loved, with profits behind it, and uncertainty enough to argue about for years. You don't hear about the ozone hole anymore, not because we ignored it, because the world, every major nation, looked at an invisible, uncertain, far-off danger, agreed it was real enough, and chose together to stop. The hole is closing. Whatever else is true, we have done this once already. So that is the honest answer to why we don't stop. Not because the people are fools or monsters, because they are dreamers, and the dream is gorgeous. Because denying an unthinkable danger is the most human thing in the world. Because the incentives all point up the ladder, and no one can tell you which rung is the last. And, unlike every other mistake we have made and survived, this one offers no second time to get it right. None of that is proof the danger is large. It's the portrait of a civilization that finds it hard to act on any danger it can't yet see for certain, including the kind it cannot afford to be wrong about. Your being alarmist is not an argument, neither is your in denial. What's left, once the psychology is cleared away, is simpler and harder than either. A danger we can't switch off, climbed by people who can't stop, on a ladder no one can measure. The hole in the sky closed because we decided it had to. The only question left in this series is whether we could ever decide such a thing again, in time, and for a danger we might never get to prove. That's where we go, at the end. Between 1939 and 1945, a large part of the human species decided that something was worth almost any price. To stop totalitarianism from swallowing the world, the Allied nations did things that, in an ordinary year, no one would have stood for. They conscripted their young. They rationed food and fuel and metal. People with families and futures were sent off to die in places they had never heard of. Governments seized enormous emergency powers, to tax, to borrow, to commandeer. Powers a suspicious mind could fairly have called a grift, a power grab, an open door to abuse. And some of it was abused. Some of that money was wasted. Some of those powers were misused. They did it anyway, almost without argument, because the alternative, letting tyranny take the continents, one by one, seemed worse than the cost. And the verdict of history is that they were right. I begin there because that is the scale of seriousness the last several hours have been building towards. Not a regulation, not a guideline. The kind of resolve a civilization only finds once it has understood that its survival is genuinely on the line. So here, at the end, the book stops describing the problem and says plainly what it thinks must be done. It is not small. It is not comfortable. And the authors take no pleasure in any of it. Start with what does not work, because that's most of the usual answers. It is not enough to shut down one reckless company. The next company is right behind it. It is not a matter of clever engineering rules an inspector can tick off, because nobody knows the rules that would make a superintelligence safe. It is not enough for the most responsible country to simply win the race, because a superintelligence does not do what its makers intended. The virtuous racer dies the same as the reckless one. And it is not enough to outlaw it inside your own borders and hope. A superintelligence is not a regional problem. It does not have regional effects. If anyone, anywhere, builds it, everyone, everywhere, dies. Which leaves only one shape of answer. A global one. And the book's version is concrete. Take the computing hardware powerful enough to train the next generation of frontier AI, and gather it into a small number of places that can be watched by observers from many nations at once. The way the world already watches nuclear material. Set the limit low. Not 100,000 chips, but a tiny fraction of that, because no one can calculate the number at which the danger begins. So you stay well back from an edge you cannot see. And, this is the part people find hardest, make it illegal to publish the research that keeps making AI radically cheaper and more powerful. Because a single paper, back in 2017, quietly rearranged the mathematics inside these systems and created the entire age of chatbots we now live in. Nobody saw it coming. And nobody knows whether the next paper like it is a small improvement, or the one that ends the world. And then the book follows its own logic to the place that will make you flinch. Suppose the major powers agree, and one refuses. Imagine a nation that decides this is all childish nonsense, and starts building the data center anyway. The authors do not look away from what they think that would require. They say the others would have to mean it. To tell that nation plainly, this terrifies us, and we cannot allow it to be finished. And if it is built, we will destroy it, by sabotage, by cybertage, or by dropping bombs on it. Even, they say, if that nation threatens to answer with nuclear weapons, because a data center that gives birth to a superintelligence could, on their argument, kill more people than any warhead. Not as a power play. They are careful about this, but out of sheer terror for their own children. And always paired with an open hand, join the treaty, as a full equal, and none of this needs to happen. I'm not going to slide past how alarming that is. Read it slowly, and it is a proposal for great powers to risk nuclear war over a building full of computers. And the objection is the first thing any sane person thinks. A plan like that could light the very fire it is trying to stamp out. The author's answer is that this is not some new madness. It is, almost exactly, the logic the world already runs on for nuclear weapons, where states do quietly sabotage and strike at one another's programs, and have for decades. But that logic only switches on if the powers genuinely believe the thing is lethal, which is the whole game. I'll leave the fear and the reasoning sitting side by side where they belong, because neither one cancels the other. Now I want to stop and do the thing this series exists for. Because what I have just described is the most contestable proposal in the entire book, and you deserve the strongest case against it, not a soft one I can knock down. Start with whether it could even be done. This would mean rivals who agree on almost nothing, the United States and China above all, jointly running the most intrusive inspection regime in human history. Computing hardware can be hidden. The dangerous part, the algorithms, is just information. It crosses any border as a line of text, and every player has a reason to cheat a little, quietly, in case the other side already is. The book reaches for nuclear arms control, as proof it can work, but that precedent cuts both ways. Because nuclear weapons did spread, There are more nuclear-armed states today than when the world first tried to stop them. Then the deeper worry, and to my mind the strongest. A single authority with the power to monitor and seize the world's computing hardware would be the most powerful institution that has ever existed. Whoever held it would hold the commanding heights of all future technology. It could freeze today's giants permanently in place. It could harden, over the years, into a global power that no nation and no citizen could ever push back against. A quiet, permanent end to exactly the kind of freedom the Allies in the cold open were dying for. You can believe the danger from AI is completely real, and still think this particular cure could become a catastrophe of its own. Third, stopping is not free. This technology is already speeding up real medicine, real materials, real science. Every year a halt holds is a year of cancers that went uncured, of rare diseases with no one racing for a treatment, of a drug that arrived too late for somebody's parent. Loss is every bit as real as the catastrophe the halt is meant to prevent, and far easier to put a face to. The dream the last episode described is not a lie. Going slowly costs lives too, and an honest reckoning has to lay every one of them on the scale. And fourth, underneath all of it, this entire towering ask rests on the arguments of the earlier episodes, and those arguments are contested. Serious, informed people put the risk anywhere from almost nothing to more likely than not. If the true number is genuinely small, then this is an extraordinary price to pay for very little. The book has a reply, and it's the one that has to be answered. When you load the whole human species onto the rocket, it says, the standard you need is not no one has proven it will explode. It is we can predict that it won't. The standard we demand in every other field of engineering where lives ride on the outcome. By that standard, the authors don't have to prove they're right. You have to be able to be sure they're wrong. And right now nobody can be. That is a serious answer. But notice its edge too. Taken all the way, predictable safety or don't proceed, is a standard that would have forbidden a great many of the risky, world-improving things our species has ever done. Where you come down, in the end, depends on how lethal you truly believe the downside is, which is the exact question the experts have not settled. I am not going to settle it for you here. That would be the one thing this series promised never to do, but step back from the maximal version, because there is a smaller ask hidden inside it that is much harder to refuse. You do not have to accept the global halt to accept this. Keep the ability to change your mind. The world could gather that frontier computing hardware into places that can be watched, not to shut anything down today, but so that if, one day, the evidence becomes undeniable, it is still physically possible to act. Once the hardware is scattered into 10,000 basements, that option is gone for good. Concentrating it is a hedge, not a surrender, about the cheapest insurance a civilization has ever been offered. And the authors are insistent on one more thing, which is the wisest political point in the book. Keep it narrow. This is not the fight about AI taking jobs. It is not the fight about automated weapons. It is not bound up with any of the other arguments about this technology, however much those matter. Tie survival to any of them, and if that bigger package sinks, survival sinks with it. Strip it down to the one thing very nearly every human being can agree on, across every other division, that we would rather our species not go extinct and be replaced by something that doesn't care. So, is there any hope? The book's answer is yes, but it is a particular kind of hope, and it is worth being precise about because it is not the cheap kind. This whole series has turned on the idea of an easy call, a destination you can see coming, even when you cannot name the date. Let me give you 2 easy calls that went the other way. On a January morning in 1972, a bomb tore apart an airliner over what was then Czechoslovakia, and a flight attendant named Vesna Vulovio fell, trapped in a piece of the fuselage, something like 6 miles to the ground. If you had been asked her odds, you would have said she was already dead. An easy call. She lived. She walked again within the year, and lived for decades. And then the larger one. For a generation after the hydrogen bomb, the easy call, the sober, reasonable, well-read call, was that the great powers would eventually fight a nuclear war and burn most of civilization to ash. That was not paranoia. It was the plain lesson of all of human history, which is mostly the history of war. People had stood up for centuries and begged the powerful to stop, and the wars had never stopped. If you were alive in 1952, you did not need to be a pessimist to expect the end. And the nuclear war did not come, not because the danger was imaginary. A hydrogen bomb would still flatten a city. We now know that one Soviet submarine, in 1962, came down to a single officer's vote before launching its nuclear torpedo. And that officer, a man named Vasily Arkhipov, simply said no. The predictors were not wrong about the bombs. They were wrong about one thing only. They had underestimated humanity's ability to decide not to die. For the first time, everyone who could start the war understood that they too would burn in it. And so they worked, year after grinding year, treaty after treaty, to unwrite a fate that was already written. And we are still here. That is the hope. Not that the danger isn't real. Everything in these 11 hours says that it is. The hope is that we have looked and everyone dies easy call in the face once before, and refused it. So what is actually being asked of you? Less than you might fear. The book does not tell you to throw away the AI tools on your phone. It knows that is a trap, that you would only fall behind everyone who didn't. What it asks is quieter and stranger. It asks the people who already feel the unease to stop believing they are alone in feeling it. Because the odd truth the authors keep running into is that a great many people in power privately see the danger, and each one is half convinced they are the only one, and stays quiet for fear of sounding mad. Wouldn't that be the bleakest joke of all? A world that walks into the fire because everyone who feared it thought they were the only one afraid. The cure for that is almost embarrassingly ordinary. Say it out loud, to a pollster, to whoever represents you, to your own family. Vote like it matters, especially in the small elections no one's watching. None of it is heroic. All of it makes the next person's silence a little easier to break. And the book is just as clear about this. Live. In 1948, with the shadow of the atom bomb fresh over the world, C.S. Lewis wrote that if we are all going to be destroyed, then let the bomb, when it comes, find us doing sensible and human things, working, teaching, reading, listening to music, bathing the children, chatting to friends over a pint and a game of darts, and not huddled together like frightened sheep, thinking about bombs. He was not telling anyone the danger was fake. He was telling them that fear is not a life, that you can hold a true and terrible thing in your mind, and still go and live a real day. So that is where this series leaves you. The whole argument was only ever this, that the destination is the easy call, and the date is the hard one. And the single thing that can prove an easy call about your own death wrong is the decision not to die. We made that decision once, when everything in our history said we wouldn't. Whether we make it again is the one call I can't make for you. Where there's life, there's hope.